Right. Welcome, Tom. Welcome to the show. And we're looking forward to a really exciting conversation on the topic of B2B influencer marketing today and all the differences between B2C and B2B, and also what's happening with the latest campaign strategies, what influencer marketers are doing around Gen AI, how they're navigating thought leadership, and a lot more. And also talking about where things are headed as we get into 2025. And let's start with a little bit of your background. Tell us about your background. How did you get into this field of
Mm.
B2B influencer marketing, and what have been some of the brands you've been working with?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I've been in the B2B influence marketing space for, since 2010 or so. Um, and a little bit prior to that, when I was working at HP, but I'll get into that in a second. But anyway, so I've been doing this for quite a while, and I've seen this sort of long, slow evolution, if you want to call it that, of the industry, and it's maturing, which I think it is really starting to mature a little bit more now than I've witnessed in the last few years. So that's kind of exciting, actually, to see it grow up a little bit. But yeah, I got my start back around 2010 or so when I went off. I left HP and I joined a small consultancy that focused on influencer marketing. Now, while I was at HP, I was part of their worldwide PR group, and I was responsible for a particular product area, and that was consumer laptops. So anything having to deal with consumer laptops, I had some hand in regarding an announcement or new product announcement or introductions, whatever iterations. So I was involved in all of that, and I handled North America, but I had a worldwide responsibility, so I had some say where Europe and Asia Pacific were concerned as well, and other places. But while I was there, the banking crisis, or whatever you want to call it, the financial crisis of 2008 occurred. And that really kind of caused an earthquake in the media landscape, because what it did was it forced a lot of the media companies that we used to do business with to get the word out about the products to fold, or to change altogether. And a lot of the journalists left and went to do other things. So it really caused a realignment internally, because we had to figure out, well, if our group of publications we normally work with was here and now it's down to here, well, what are we going to do? Because we can't just leave it at that. We have to figure out other ways that are perhaps more creative to get the word out to our consumers about the products. So I took the initiative to start looking at and working with bloggers, because nobody called them influencers back then. That word wasn't even used, at least not regarding this. So we worked and looked at bloggers, tech bloggers in particular. And fortunately, there were quite a few of them, because blogging was a thing that was coming into its own at that point. And people like Robert Scoble over at Microsoft were starting to gain a lot of traction, and people were giving him a lot of attention, not only about the content that he was developing, but about the whole movement in general. And he was sort of a Pied Piper for a little while there regarding all that. So a lot of people jumped onto it and started blogging about tech products. So, like I said, there were a lot of people to work with and choose from at that point, and that was beneficial. But I had to put my toe in the water, because management didn't understand, well, their attitude was, well, who are these people? And, why are we working with them? So it was a little bit of a trial and error. We had to figure out who were the really good people to work with, and as opposed to the not so good. And we figured it out, and built a nice cadre of bloggers to work with going forward. And we experimented a bit with different types of programs and everything else, some contests and things like that. But it wasn't until I jumped ship and joined the consultancy that I was thrown into the B2B aspect of the world, because prior to that, I was doing all consumer. And the B2B world was a lot different. Now, fortunately, having worked at HP, I had a lot of friends over in the the enterprise division, which was all B2B. And I knew quite a bit about what they did, the product sets and all that, but I was not an expert by any means. So when I joined the consultancy, ironically enough, HP came knocking at the door, so to speak, and said they wanted to set up a B2B program for bloggers, to get the word out about what they were doing. So we craft
What kind of time frame was this?
it's like
Just to give
20,
people the perspective.
it's about 2010.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was thinking. Yeah,
2010 was when it started. And we started with just simple events. So, for instance, a product group inside of the enterprise division, like enterprise storage or enterprise networking or enterprise software or whatever servers. We would hold an event and invite select bloggers into the event, which was always held on site on the company campus. And we would give them a deep dive for a day and a half, present to them a whole bunch of things, but also get a lot of feedback from them. And, when possible, we would take them on little tours of the campus and so they could see and meet people in different departments. And that worked out really, really well. So from there, we just sort of built a strategy that was sort of ongoing, kind of added to it as we kept moving along. And I did that for about 6 years, and then I left and went out on my own. But when I went out on my own, I really wasn't interested in working with enterprises so much anymore, only for two main reasons. One, it's hard getting things done with an enterprise. It's hard making an impact. And it's hard getting paid because you have to get into their procurement system, and that's a whole labyrinth of bureaucracy and approvals. And it could take you 6-9 months to get approved. It's ridiculous. So, from a small business point of view, wanted to work with companies who are a lot more nimble, can make a bigger impact a lot faster. So I work with startups that have been financed, usually in the B round of financing, receive that all the way up to being public. But even if they're public, they're more what most people would consider to be sort of a mid-sized company. So that's how it all sort of started. And it was, jumping into the B2B space was really, it was quite a bit different than the consumer
yeah.
space. Because in the consumer space, you could ship out a laptop to somebody and you can get them to, open it up and review. They can do an unboxing and they can do all these sort of things that we used to do in those days. And it was, they could take it and then integrate it into their environment, and do all these neat things with it and then do a series of blog posts or videos, whatever they wanted to do, or a combination thereof. And it worked out really well. But on the B2B side, well, you can't ship out $1 million pieces of equipment for the most part to these folks. So we had to bring them in so they could see the stuff and kind of even play with it at times. We'd arrange for them to get time to experiment a little bit with the equipment and software, whatever. And then that way they could have a more hands-on aspect or,
Yeah.
to the content that they developed, so they had,
It
it wasn't just a
it
bunch of presentations.
it sounds like you were, even back then, back in 2010, as you're inviting the bloggers into HP, that
Mhm.
you're kind of getting into a little bit of that analyst and influencer relations side of things too. So I would think a lot of what you learned there, you can apply to today's influencer marketing world as well, because it's all
Oh,
about,
absolutely.
yeah, identifying those influencers and sharing news about the company's products and services, as well as having them, tweet or whatever it might be, or make posts on LinkedIn, short form, long form. There's also that kind of relationship angle too. So there's kind of some Venn diagrams there between influencer marketing and analyst and influencer relations, right? Can you
Yeah, yeah.
talk
So
a bit about that and how you worked with others in HP, perhaps, and kind of
yeah, it was
where
it
the
was
two roles picked up?
it was pretty confusing in those days because people had different, the nomenclature matters. So once we started to use the word influencer, the analyst relations team was like, no, 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 you can't use that word. That's the word we use for analysts. And okay, so we just reverted back to calling them bloggers and stuff. But what we started to figure out is that the bloggers we invited in meshed pretty well with some of the analysts that we got invited in too. Because when we were doing planning an event like this, we had to let multiple teams know that we were doing it, and we wanted to do that because I wanted their input. I wanted the PR team to be involved. I wanted the AR team to be involved. I wanted all these teams involved, the product managers, everything else, because that way we were going to put together a really robust event that delved into cool product and wasn't just a bunch of marketing talk. So, we were going to get real product managers in there and whatnot to talk about these things. And the analysts got along well with the influencers, because even in those days, some of the bloggers were already sort of bleeding into the analyst space a little bit, independent analyst space, not that they had the resources or anything of a Forrester or Gartner or any of that. The Forrester and Gartner people wouldn't have really sat in with us at that point in time, but some of the smaller firms did. And they all got along really well. Now, the press didn't, because the press are guarded. They're all thinking, they have a different mentality. So, the average reporter comes in and thinks, well, I'm not going to ask too many questions in front of these people because I don't want them to know what I'm thinking. And I don't want them to get the information that I would necessarily glean through my questioning. So they would try to set up little side times with some of the people to interview them and kind of get the questions answered that way. But it was funny, on one trip we did to Dallas, we visited the data center with the Dallas Cowboys because HP had supplied the equipment in those days to them. And so they gave a whole walkthrough of the data center there, which is really cool, Cowboy Stadium, whatever they call it. And one of the reporters that came along on that particular event, that trip, he, at the end of it, he was like, man, just include me in all these influencer or these blogger events you have, because they're so much more rewarding than being with the other press. He was like, you guys have a lot more fun and I learn a lot more.
Yeah.
So he was all into it. He didn't want to hang out with the press after that. He wanted to hang out with the bloggers and stuff because it's more fun.
Yeah. Because sometimes the press, I remember with some of the companies I've worked with in prior years, the press interaction was just sitting down with them and doing a half an hour interview, asking questions, and that was it. So, and doing that, through the whole day with a lot of different journalists, but it was more of a limited interaction. So I'm sure the bloggers got to kind of see and learn a lot more than the typical journalist.
They did, because their questions were totally different. Because the bloggers would come in and be like, well, I've implemented this type of technology before, these are the issues I ran into. How did you guys do it? Or how did you overcome that? How did you fix those things? And that's the kind of stuff that reporters don't know that, because they've never implemented any of the technology before.
Yeah.
So the bloggers, so the product managers appreciated having bloggers come in, because they're like, well, these guys get it. These people understand what's going on. I mean, they understand like implementing the technology and wrapping it into some other data stack or tech stack is going to be, a little more complicated than perhaps, the marketing literature would let on. So, how do you deal with that? And then you can have honest conversations. If the press wasn't interested in any of that, they didn't know what was being talked about. Now, I guess some of the analysts did, but Forrester, Gartner, everything else, they're pretty aloof. So they weren't interested in our events anyway. But the independent analysts were, and we started working with them pretty early on. And I still deal with some of them. I have relationships with them that go back, over a decade as a result of some of this work.
Yeah, and let's bring it forward to the present day. And just before we dive into getting into some of the differences that you see between B2C and B2B influencer marketing, We'll talk about all definitions and kind of best practices, worst practices. Just bring us up to speed a bit. Present day, what are some, maybe some of the types of brands you're working with, types of campaigns, and then we'll get into kind of more of the discussion on the discipline itself.
Yeah, I work with a CX company right now. I've got a subscription company I'm working with right now. I've got a consulting company based out of Vietnam I work with right now. I've worked with some cybersecurity companies. That's an interesting bunch. The cybersecurity people are, especially the influencers in that space. It's really kind of curious. It's fun. It's definitely different. Pricing. I've done work with professional pricing companies. So it doesn't really matter what the company is. I mean, it helps if I've got a track record in that space, of course, because I've already got sort of a Rolodex of influencers that I can lean into at that point already. They're sort of ready-made. But a lot of companies today, they bleed into these spaces anyway, because a lot of companies are touching on CX. So it's not so clearly defined and in boxes as the way the engineering department would like it to be. Anybody dealing with marketing understands that it's a little more loosey-goosey. So those are some of the types, but HP, Dell, Adobe, those are all companies I worked with in the past. But again, I don't really focus on the enterprise too much anymore. I wouldn't turn it down if it was a really cool project. And I knew that I could get into the procurement process or get in through the procurement system
Yeah.
easily and quickly.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I'm not.
Okay.
I
Great.
don't want to wait around 9 months to get paid.
Yeah.
You know.
So tell us for those, I know a lot of B2B marketers, the influencer marketing side is, unless you're a large tech brand that's been doing it for 5 years or more, many of the smaller companies, even in the tech space or management consultancies, I would say that B2B influencer marketing is still pretty new and novel for them. So maybe for those audiences, can you describe a little bit about B2C, how that grew up, and then kind of where we are with the state of the art with B2B, and what are some of
Sure.
the differences between the two that you're
Sure.
seeing?
So, like I said, harking back to 2010, 2011, 2012, it was very difficult to find bloggers in those days. So you'd have to go through manual searches. I mean, they were very cumbersome. You Google whatever, every search engine you could think of, you would be hitting it up because every one of them was a little different in those days in terms of the kind of results it brought back to you. But I don't know. Do you remember such a thing called blog rolls, Nick? When on a blog page, it would have a list of other bloggers that blogger followed or was connected to. Well, blog rolls were, it's like it was like a rabbit den. You could go down and like you could squirrel and worm your way through the internet through all these different connections to the blog rolls. That's one of the ways we used to find them. Now the platforms came on the scene, but they all focus on the consumer side of things, so it really wasn't helpful to me. And from there, it just became very transactional. So today, when you go to an influencer marketing platform, some of them are really quite good, but you can go in there, you can discover your influencers, you can engage with your influencers there, you can enroll them into your campaign, and you can pay them, and you can communicate with them. All of that software has gotten a lot better, and it's pretty seamless now, from what I can understand. But again, it's all transactional. It's all about finding people. Hey, we'll pay you this to hawk our lipstick or our shoes or our handbag or our hotel at some destination or something. So it's all very transactional. On the B2B side, it doesn't operate that way. It's much more relationship driven and knowledge driven. So harking back to some of the bloggers that we used to look for, the cloud computing, enterprise networking, enterprise software, enterprise storage. it's hard to fake being an expert in those spaces. So what you're going to look for is you're going to look for people that are really knowledgeable, that have a track record, and that publish content, on on those topics. This is where a platform like I'm combining the two words today. LinkedIn or Thinkers360 comes in handy because I can go right into a community there, and I can quickly search around and figure out who are some of the players in this particular niche. Now, on the B2C side, there are lists of people that are, fashion influencers or travel influencers or things like that. But because the platforms needed to be able to distinguish influencers more quickly, what they did was they started to divide them up according to the size of their following. So on the consumer side of things, you'll see somebody's a nano influencer, a micro influencer, a macro influencer, a mega influencer, or now they've become even a celebrity themselves. So all of that is just all of it is just what the size of their audience is. Well, on the B2B side of things, that doesn't really apply that much. Yeah, I mean, it's nice having influencers that have large followings for sure, and there are some out there that do. But in that particular niche in which you're operating, you don't always need, 300,000 followers. You could, if somebody's got 3,000 followers or 13,000 followers, that could be more than enough for what you need right now. And so what you're looking for is you're looking for knowledge, expertise, track record, some thought leadership there through the content that they publish. And, there are people that have handled the technology before. They've or implemented it. They've led teams to implement it. So they know what it means to integrate something with a tech stack. On the consumer side, it's all just, like I said, it's these, products that you can buy. You're going to make an emotional purchase
Yeah.
and make it. But on the B2B side of things, you're not going to buy, you know,
Yeah.
a CX, product for your company without really thinking it through, right? I mean,
Yeah. And
you're
there's multiple decision makers too, right? So it's not just one
right.
person making a
Yeah. I
spot
mean,
purchase.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to talk to the CIO, you're going to talk to the CTO, you're going to talk to like
Yeah.
these other people inside that are a little lower down that are senior management still they're the ones that are going to be implementing it. How is this all going to fit together? Is it going to fit together seamlessly? How much ramp up time do we need? So there's a lot that gets considered there.
Yeah.
So that's what the B2B universe
Yeah.
has to think about.
I would just add, I think B2C, the platforms are very advanced and do really well because it is transactional, and you can work with very simple metrics around follower counts and audience demographics, and you can actually measure the ROI for each influencer and get those details right away. So they know the price of the product, they know what they're paying their influencer, and they can look at the ROI, on a per post basis, right? So
Mhm.
I think that's evolved very naturally and easily because the metrics are so simple, right?
Yeah, it's
Um,
all about
I
social
think,
media. It's not
yeah,
about any other. So on the B2B side, you've got to think more. You've got to think more. Take more of an integrated approach. So
yeah,
when I'm looking at content for a B2B client, I'm looking at podcasts. I'm looking at getting their spokespeople onto podcasts. I'm looking at LinkedIn articles. I'm looking at blog posts. I'm looking at perhaps even getting sponsored articles in or contributed articles into publications, trade publications. I'm looking at video casts, video interviews, right? I'm looking at maybe having them come and speak at my event, as the moderator of a panel, or maybe of a panelist, or maybe even a keynote. So there's a lot more to consider because a lot of the B2B influencers are consultants, independent analysts, right? They're not just content creators, they do a lot more. So all of those things can be kind of thought about and integrated into the program if you're doing it right. On the consumer side of things, it's all just about social media, TikTok, Instagram, whatever. And all of that can be measured, yes, But in the B2B universe, the buyers operate a lot differently. And, they're, like I said, they're not making emotional decisions on multi-million dollar
Yeah.
products, right?
So you can almost get more creative with a B2B campaign because you have far more platforms to work with and more content types. So instead of just going for like the short form and long form posts on LinkedIn, you can diversify your strategy, work with a number of different influencers, some who may be known as speakers, some who may be social media influencers, some who may be academics or authors. So you can
Mhm.
kind of diversify your influencer personas, but also diversify where you're pushing the content and the kind of content that you're working with, right? So it's very
Exactly. So
different. Yeah.
I equate it to kind of making a mosaic. So, a mosaic is made up of all those little tiles, and each one might be a different color or a different pattern in there or whatever. So you're looking to build a picture that speaks to your buying audience, but your buying audience is likely all over the place. So they're not just on LinkedIn. They're not just on X. They're not just on YouTube. They're in all of these different places, and they're
Yep, and like specialist communities too, right? So not
specialist
only the social
communities.
platforms, but the specialist communities
Right. And then
for those
there's
areas. Yeah,
those what we call the dark social or dark web, where they're in private groups, private message groups, private physical groups, even roundtables that meet on Zoom or something else like that. And there's no way to track any of that. You can't track any of that. No marketing software can't track any of that. So you know, it's you've got to think then a little bit deeper. It's much more of a marketing think because you've got to think, well, how you've got to devise ways. Well, how am I going to penetrate those dark areas? Well, one of the ways to do that is with influencers, because a lot of the influencers are operating in those spaces as well. They might even manage some of those private groups. So if you can get in good with some of those influencers and you can get them to start referring to your brand inside of those groups, well, now you're shedding some light in there, and you can start to reap the benefits of that. But on the consumer side, it's all just about, to me, my biggest complaint with the consumer side, as it's become not only transactional, it's become just advertising, because the brands will dictate to the influencers, will say this,
mm,
boom, boom, say this,
yeah,
put this in your post. They develop. So that's just
yeah,
advertising. That's
yeah,
not, that's just renting out
yeah,
billboards on TikTok or Instagram. It's not marketing in the
yeah.
true sense of the word, right?
Yeah, and the interesting thing there is to kind of add to your thinking there, just to kind of pile on. Um, I think the I think the B2C is very much advertising, isn't it? But B2B, I know brands now that we're working with that they deliberately don't want to promote even their products or services. They don't even want to mention the product or service. They're aiming for thought leadership, get the thought leadership in front of the buyers, or that community, and then let the buyer discover the products themselves. So they take them on this kind of thought leadership journey, and the whole B2B influencer marketing campaign doesn't even point to the product or service. It's taking people to the thought leadership content, which is very interesting, and we're starting to see more of that now too. So it's really a long journey, isn't it? And trying to win the market through thought leadership and differentiation, and just get them thinking,
Mm.
coming to your brand, coming to the tech brand, to learn about the latest, what's the art of the possible for Gen AI, for example, and seeing real life case studies and examples. And then in your journey there, as you're learning as a buyer, you say, oh, yeah, that's from Amazon or whoever it might be, right?
Exactly. So you're trying to get, many of these companies, my clients, and elsewhere, they have some really wonderful people that work there, and they have cool backgrounds, diverse experience, diverse ways of looking at things. And the object is largely to get those people out there to demonstrate that thought leadership and that experience, share the knowledge capital that they have, and to allow the buying audience to sort of find you that way
Yeah.
and to sort of learn from some of these folks. Go, oh yeah, okay, so these guys kind of get it. They've they're facing these types of problems that I'm facing. They've handled these things. This is how they did it. And again, it doesn't mention the product set really. It's more about solving problems, right? Because everybody's got problems and everybody's looking to get them solved. And the B2B buying audience is looking to educate themselves a lot these days as a result of the pandemic that we had a few years back. And when everybody was thrust online, there were no events to go to for a while there. So the only place you could go, business doesn't stop. The only place you can go is online. So, you know, places like Thinkers360 probably saw quite a bump in activity and traffic as a result of some of that. Because people are looking around, they're looking around for the good content. You know, they don't want to read stale blog posts. They want to read a blog post that has actually something to say in it and offers an opinion
Mm.
and maybe some action items you can take now, right?
And yeah, and there's some interesting pathways that marketers can create nowadays and are creating. So they're putting their own thought leaders out there, their executives and their thought leaders within their company. And many of those thought leaders are becoming influencers in their own right, right? So a lot of the big tech firms have chief evangelists, chief innovation officers, but they're also working as in a kind of a very strong influencer role, and pushing more and more on platforms like LinkedIn to build their follower accounts. But then also in terms of the pathways, what I've seen them doing is actually using external influencers to point to their influencers, right? So instead
Mhm.
of in the B2C where you've got the hyperlink to go buy the product, in B2B, they're using an influencer to point you to their own influencers and their own thought leaders. So it's getting pretty interesting how the content's evolving and the strategies are evolving. What are you seeing there in terms of the typical with your clients? Their typical, how are they structuring their campaigns? What's the mix of influencers and social channels and content types that you're seeing?
I'm noticing a couple of shifts that started a few months back, and it's like little glimmers at first, but it's taking on more steam, more momentum, and I'd say those two things are the first is that there's a more of a desire to reach the C-suite inside of buying companies by getting just as you sort of articulated, Nick, getting their spokespeople into places where those C-suite people can be exposed or get exposure to their thought leaders, right? So that's one thing. So a desire to penetrate the C-suite mentality a little more, get the thought leaders into positions where they're getting seen, read, whatever, by those people. And then the second thing is more programmatic content. There's a desire to do things more programmatically with influencers rather than just do one off pieces of content. Now, I am not by any means dissuading anybody from doing one off pieces of content. Get your spokesperson onto a podcast, arrange for a LinkedIn article to be written, things like that. There's nothing wrong with any of that. I would continue to do it no matter what. But I'm noticing that there is that desire to do something more programmatically, more scheduled, so that and what that tells me too is that they are seeing and understanding that relationships with people, influencers are very important. So they want to get to know them a bit better. They want to do a little bit more business with them on on a scheduled basis, like I said, and they want to get repeat pieces of content into that
Mm.
influencer's content cycle because they're seeing value there. Because let's face it, most corporate content is pretty stale, whether the company's large or small. It doesn't really have much of a voice. And what I mean by voice is it doesn't really have much of a brand voice. So it's all sort of been watered down by the legal department and the PR department and the, it's been sort of, diminished. And you can get around that by putting out your thought leaders who are offering up some interesting insights and opinions about things and letting them do that. And I find that the more personality that gets injected into the content that way, the more it resonates. The more it resonates, the more, they're going to see some demand gen going forward because there will, those buyers will start coming to the company and saying, "Hey, I heard your spokespeople on this podcast, or I heard them on a radio show, or I heard them on a, they sounded pretty good. I'd like to learn a little more."
So what just to kind of wrap that up, what number of or range of influencers are you seeing brands working with throughout the year? And what platforms are they targeting, and then what content types do you typically see?
Well, okay, numbers of influencers. Well, for B2B companies, you don't have to think like a consumer company does. Consumer companies think in terms of mass. So I need 300 influencers talking about our lipstick product, right? Or I need 150 influencers talking about our shoes, or whatever it is. We need to own social media for the next week and a half or 2 weeks or whatever we're working with these influencers. The B2B crowd has the benefit of not having to work with tons of influencers. So it's going to be a heck of a lot more cost effective that way. And maybe it's 5 or 6, you know,
Yep.
it just depends on who your buying audience is, where they're going for their information, who they're following, and what are you trying to say to that audience? And what is the kind of content that's going to be the best kind of content to do that? And usually that content is a medley. So it's not just getting onto podcasts, or not just doing videos, or not just doing LinkedIn lives with somebody. It's sort of a blend of things. So it's a mix of all of that. But you can narrow down the number of influencers you work with if you work with them on a programmatic basis, because you can say, okay, I'm going to set aside budget for Q1 and we're going to work with these 3 influencers. And then we're going to try to get any earned opportunities or any sponsored one-off opportunities that look really good in that period. Q2, we might work with one of the same influencers that we worked with in Q1. But we're going to change it up a little bit. We're going to work, we're going to use a couple of other ones, right? Because we have an event in September and we want to start doing a little lead up to that event, right? And then in
Yep.
Q3, you could say, hey, we're going to bring a few of the influencers to our event. Maybe one of them's going to podcast from there. Another one's going to do, moderate a panel discussion for us, plus do some social media while they're there, interview some of our execs. So you can kind of you can lay it out ahead of time that way. But it's all predicated on relationships, right? And the best business is done through relationships. Let's face it. Like every day, probably like you, I get hit up with these people on LinkedIn that are like, "Hey, I can get you like 300 appointments next month, and we can get you like 50 clients." And, but I'm like, at what cost, right? Not only monetary cost, but, what does that mean to my existing clients? I don't want to deliver poor customer experience for them, just because I'm ramping up new clients. I used to see that in PR firms I worked with. There was a constant churn. It was, we got to get new clients, got to get new clients, got to get new clients. And it was going out, doing new business pitches, boom, boom, boom. And it was really, to me, sort of funny because, here I am in this PR firm and I'm being asked to be a salesperson, right? So, and my retort to sometimes was, well, if you want me to be a salesperson, then pay me like one. I want a piece of that action when it comes in, the $5 million account. Well, how about a percentage? They would never do it, of course, Um, but I think that way because when I worked on Wall Street a long, long time ago as a stockbroker, you're paid by commission. So if you're going to be a salesperson, a producer, that's what they're known as on Wall Street. Traders, producers, anybody who brings money into the firm is known as a producer. Everybody else is overhead. Overhead gets cut first, right? If there's any kind of setback, recession, you guarantee it. All the overhead they're out first, right? That can include management because a lot of management is overhead too. So, because of that experience, that's the way I think.
Okay, and what about, let's touch a bit on, before we go to the next kind of topic, I was going to talk to you a little bit about platforms versus agencies and hybrid, and but before we jump onto that, in terms of the social media platforms, what are you seeing out there? Is everyone just doing LinkedIn, or are the more
Okay.
creative ones actually looking beyond LinkedIn and looking at specialty communities and other things?
Okay. So let's distinguish. When we're talking about platforms, we're talking about social media platforms because there's influencer marketer platforms that are out there too. And there's a dime a dozen of them now. I mean, at one point on my site, I had counted up to like 700 and, I lost count. I think there's got to be thousands of them now. Right. And they range in price, a couple $100 a month to $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year, whatever functionality you want to buy with that, with number of seats. So that's one thing. So all of those platforms, for the most part, those influencer marketing platforms, all focus on consumer. They don't cater for the most part to B2B. There's like
Yeah,
maybe one
they
there.
actually turn away the work, right? Usually, they'll
Right, because
yeah,
there's not a lot of
because
money in
they
them.
can't
There's not a lot of
the
money in
the
B2B.
software doesn't handle it, right?
Yeah, because it's not transactional like consumer, so it's a lot
Yeah.
harder to do that. Um, so for social media platforms, the ones that I find that would be important are LinkedIn, X to an extent, to a much lesser extent, Facebook, and then you're going to get your TikToks and Instagrams and things like that.
Yeah. And
Oh, I know.
where would you put YouTube there? Where would you rank that
Oh,
one?
I would rank YouTube as being pretty high from the influencer standpoint. So a lot of influencers have nice YouTube channels, you know, I mean, really pretty good ones, very informative, interview good people. I think so. I think YouTube is a good one, but most companies don't utilize YouTube correctly. What they'll do is they'll take the videos they produce and just put them onto their YouTube channel and leave them to die. It's a graveyard. YouTube is a graveyard of corporate video content. There's like 5
Mm.
views.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's a shame because some of the content is actually not bad. It's just that they don't package it up well for the platform. Um, LinkedIn, of course, is the preeminent B2B social media platform. But there are other platforms out there like Thinkers360, which is different than LinkedIn and offers a different kind of content and a different way of viewing the influencers even. So most people again will think of influencers and go, well, how many followers do they have? They got 30,000 followers on LinkedIn and 5,000 on X. Okay, that's good. That's decent,
Mm.
but that they kind of leave it there. But Thinkers offers up a little bit more holistic look at, well, is this person a speaker? Are they an author, a book author? Um, do they do LinkedIn lives? What other kind of content do they produce? Are they on the leaderboards? You guys offer up leaderboards. So if I want to see some leadership in a particular niche, you guys have, I don't know how many leaderboards you have now. You have quite a few. I
Yeah,
can go in there and I can,
we just hit 100 on the
yeah, okay.
leaderboard.
So 100
Yeah,
leaderboards. So that's a lot of niches, right?
yeah,
That's a lot of niches. So I can go in there though, as a marketer, and I can look through some of those leaderboards and I go, oh, okay, there's some good people in here. Boom, 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 boom. Identify them and then dive a little deeper, staying on Thinkers, and look at some of the data that you've collected on them. I can read some of the content they've produced there. So all of this is very helpful and helps me make quick decisions. So I can build a list of influencers pretty quickly.
yeah.
I'm
Because
going to
if you
supplement
have,
that.
yeah,
I'm going
if
to
you have
supplement that with LinkedIn, but
yeah, because if you have an influencer, I think with B2B, you got to look at not only the follower count, because they may have 1 million followers, but I've seen a trend on LinkedIn recently. I don't know if it's the last 6 months or maybe longer, but people are starting to post. It's becoming a bit like Facebook, right, or TikTok, right? So they start even serious B2B analysts and thought leaders and authors. They're starting to post. They're getting into that kind of cat video genre, right? But it's actually working for them. I mean, it's working incredibly well, and you see their follower counts just spiraling upwards. Um, but so I mean, it's a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because it's good for the influencer because they're probably commanding higher bill rates and becoming one of the more prominent people on LinkedIn in certain topics. But I think for the marketer, they've got to mix it up a bit. Like maybe if you're doing your campaign, get one of those million plus people, right, because of their audience, but also pick someone with 15,000 followers, right, because they may have a far better connection of analysts and C-level, C-suite, etc. Right, so
mhm.
you've got to kind of try and look at what's under the covers there beyond the follower count. Is that something you kind of advise your clients, is to kind of get a bit of a hedge their bets a bit between the
Yeah,
nanos and
you
the mega
can't rely on
influencers and the
follower
micro?
counts. Follower counts don't do much. I mean, all it's really going to help you with is like if Nick Evans here, posts an article on LinkedIn for me and you've got, I don't know, what do you got, 10, 20,000 followers on there, Nick? I don't know what you've got on there. But a percentage of those followers are going to see the content that you post there. Okay, great. That's great. But do I know, is Nick the right influencer for my client? I mean, is your audience the right audience for my client? Maybe it's 20% of your audience is the right audience, right? Maybe it's 50%. I don't know. It depends on the client, and it depends on what we're trying to do together. But so I look at a much more holistic point of view. So I look at, and I'll include all this information to my clients. Like, well, the person's a book author. They're on their third book, right? They do speaking around the world. They go to Davos. They go to Mobile World Congress. They go to CES. They go to these other events that are smaller. Um, they publish. Also they're a contributor at another trade pub. So there's a possibility of getting mentioned in an article there. They do LinkedIn articles. They do LinkedIn posts. They use X, but not so much.
Yeah,
So I kind of build a real
yeah,
portrait of each influencer for the client so they can understand what that influencer is all about and whether the influencer is a good fit or not. Now, again,
mm,
most clients are like us. We look at, it's like when you go to a restaurant, Nick, and you're looking through the window. They can have the most superb food in the world, but if you only see 3 people sitting in there, you're thinking, oh, maybe this place isn't so great, right? But it could be a new restaurant. Word hasn't gotten out about it yet. Maybe it's an off night. Maybe maybe they pack it in on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, but Tuesday and Wednesday they're not as busy. So it depends on when you're looking in through the window, right?
mm,
Now another night you go by and it's like, wow, there's a line standing outside. It's it's standing room only, and you gotta, it's hard to get a reservation, and it's busy. There's buzz about it. So that's just natural human behavior. We tend to want to go to places that there's a lot of other people going to, right? Because we want to experience that for ourselves. Same thing with influencers. It's like, well, Nick's got 50,000 followers. He's doing all this stuff on LinkedIn, or he's publishing all this stuff in Thinkers. This is great, but, you might not be the right influencer for me, right? I might need somebody that's got a lot more expertise and authority in a really developed niche that you're not in, right? So you've got to think of it that way. You've got to think, where's my buying audience going to go for information? Who are they going to listen to? Why are they going to listen to them? And that's why I say it's like building a mosaic, because you've got to put all these little tiles with these different colors in place to build the picture, right? And over time, the more influencers you work with, you're filling in all those spaces, and the picture starts getting more and more defined.
Yeah, and let's talk about Gen AI as well before we wrap up. I've got really two main topics before we wrap up. One of them's like, how is Gen AI impacting the influencer marketing space, and even the content creation side of thought leadership, what it's doing to thought leadership, right? And influencer marketing. And then we'll close out on where do you think things are going in 2025. But let's start with Gen AI. What are you seeing as the good and the bad there in terms of what's happening?
Yeah. So, like with any new
And
toy.
I'll move over here out of the sun.
Oh, okay. Well, like with any new toy, you're gonna find people that just overuse it and abuse it, and I see that on LinkedIn already, where there are LinkedIn posts and LinkedIn articles that are clearly generated by an AI engine, right? Chat GPT, or pick which one you want. Um, so I think people are getting more astute more quickly about picking out that content. So in that sense, I hold out a lot of hope, because I think everybody's got an internal editor, and they're able to look at a piece of content and go, that looks like it was generated by Chat GPT. I'm going to pass it by. But
Mm.
smarter people will use it and say, okay, develop a draft of a post for me. And then they're going to go and edit it themselves, because it's easier to edit something than it is to start writing from scratch. I don't care who you are. That's probably the way it is. So there's a lot of benefit to it. I mean, you can have it develop lists for you. I've used it to go find influencers even at times, or to help me evaluate them. It's been a kind of curious, experiment. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't always trust it, so I always go and verify. Trust but verify, right? The old the old adage. So I think that it's got lots of great utility. I think people just need to be cognizant of everybody else out there. The more they get used to it, the more they're going to identify it. So you should be able to go in there and heavily edit it and make whatever content that you ask it to write for you to do it on your own. Now, that being said, I know there are entire YouTube channels that are completely AI generated content at this point. You know, it's all video, it's all slick, but I can pick it out right away and I just turn it off, because I know it's just a rehash of other content out there. I want to go to the original content. So that's the way I kind
Yeah.
of see it now from the influencer marketing standpoint. I don't see it. I see influencers still developing really good content. So I think the people that are out there that I deal with, at least, put out quality content. They're not trying to scam anybody or pull the wool over anybody's eyes. Um, they're still very cognizant of their work product and the quality of the work product and their thought leadership, because that's what they're getting attention for. They're getting attention for their thought leadership, not Chat GPT's thought leadership, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and again, if I'm going to an influencer, in cloud computing, and I know a number of them there, I'm going to go see what they have to say about something. right? I'm not just
Mm.
going to go to ChatGPT. I'm going to
Yep.
get the real deal. I want the real deal. I
Yeah.
want real Coke, not Diet Coke.
And if
You
if
know,
you're a marketer and you're paying an influencer for content, you're going to have that. You probably have that editorial hat that you're wearing anyway, right? So you get their long form blog post or whatever it might be. Maybe you're paying them for some long form content as well as short form. So you get a blog, right, or 1,000 words or whatever it might be. You're going to look at that as an editor, a content editor as well, and read through it and make sure it makes sense. And now the other added step is you want to keep an eye out for any GPT content in there, and you can likely spot it very quickly, and just try and work with your influencer to make sure they're not taking shortcuts, right? So
yeah,
we've seen that a few times, and what we do is we just work with the influencer and make sure we're getting high end thought leadership content, and we kind of work in between the brand and the influencer to keep the bar high on the thought leadership content. So
mhm.
I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. You almost, if you're a marketing agency or someone like yourself that's working with brands and influencers, and you're kind of in the middle, you're trying to maintain that thought leadership and the quality, and you have to be diplomatic too, right? So have you come across that where you're kind of being a bit of a diplomat and you're trying to
Oh yeah.
push the influencer for the highest quality content they can
It,
produce, right?
I've had to use I've had to use diplomacy in a number of areas, but it hasn't been so much around that yet. It's been more around, they expect me to do this, but I contracted to do that. What's the middle ground here? So, I will often get in there and insert myself in the middle and say to the client, let me handle it. I'll deal with the influencer. Don't worry about it. And that way the influencer feels more comfortable too, because then they're not, just dealing with the company spokespeople. They're dealing with me, and they understand that I understand what they're going through a bit. So, I'm able to sort of broker things a little bit that way. Now, in terms of the chat GPT or the artificial intelligence question, um, I've seen them use it. I think I've seen influencers use it before, but again, they've always injected their own voice into whatever piece of content they deliver. So, and that includes, typos and things like that at times, and I'll always read through things and try to like clean it up, just to, so it's all polished, when they deliver to the client, if I can. But I haven't seen too much of a problem with it yet, Nick. Now that's yet, right? The key word there is yet. I'm sure that it's occurring. I'm sure that there are instances out there that I'm not even aware of, with other companies and stuff that's occurred. But again, I like to think that I'm dealing with quality people, quality influencers, and I vet them a lot. I mean, I vet them through just experiences with them. It's building a relationship with somebody. You're going to figure out, I've got an influencer who uses AI generated images for his LinkedIn posts all the time, but he's upfront about it. He's like, I use AI to help me generate some of these
Yeah.
posts.
Well,
Okay. I mean,
that's kind of a good
some of the
it's a
graphics.
good
Yeah. Okay.
strategy, right? It's a good
Yeah.
strategy because then you're not risking infringing on
Mhm.
copyrighted images, right? So that's a
Right.
good
So, I mean,
approach.
they've been pretty upfront about that. I help influencers a lot develop proposals for clients and other companies because they're like, I don't understand what the company really wants here. They say one thing, then they want another. Da, 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 da. But since I deal with these companies all the time, marketing people, PR, AR, I have a really, I like to think I have a pretty good understanding about how they think and what their pain points are. So I try to make it easy as possible for the brand that I'm working with, as well as for the influencer I'm working with. So I try to like broker that relationship. And at some point, the brand and the influencer should start speaking to each other without me. So I can go on and start cultivating other relationships for them. but that's the way it usually works. Again, I have seen AI generated content, or what I suspect to be AI generated content on LinkedIn quite a bit lately. Again, when I when I see that though, I just bypass it because to me it doesn't hold much value. So again, if I'm reading an article by you, I would expect to get some insights from your depth of knowledge and experience, and you to reference those things in your content, which you normally do. So that's the benefit there, right? That's the unique aspect that you provide that no open AI tool is going to be able to provide, because they all these open AI tools just draw from data lakes that are huge, right?
Mm.
They're
I think I
massive.
I think I heard somewhere someone had this really great comment. I can't remember who it was, but they said one of the issues with Gen AI content is it's all historical, right? It's looking at existing content, and so it's not really forward looking or forward thinking. So that's kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
it doesn't
And
have it doesn't have
yeah,
its finger on the pulse of what's going on and where things are
yeah.
going.
And actually, if you ask it to do, I played around, and if you ask it to do predictions, it will tell you things that are very obvious. Like it will say, "Oh, cloud computing is going to increase in popularity," or it tells you the like really simple things. It's not really making any predictions. It's just telling people what they want to hear, and
And
it's looking at prior predictions, but there's nothing really substantial to it. Um, but actually, on that note, for our last question today, and a great, really interesting conversation. We could go on for 2 or 3 hours, I'm sure. Um, but so it's our prediction season with Thinkers 360. We're publishing 2025 predictions on topics like the future of work and Gen AI. And actually, we're going to be doing some predictions for influencer marketing too. So we're going to obviously invite you to give your predictions for the series as well. But maybe you can give us a kind of a preview, and I'll put you on the spot. And as our closing question, what are your predictions for B2B influencer marketing in 2025? Give us a few thoughts on that topic.
I'm really probably more hopeful about it than I have been in quite a while. It's as you and I have discussed during this conversation, the evolution of B2B influencer marketing has been kind of a slow one. So there have been a little episodes here or there where it's kind of popped up to the forefront, but for the most part, it's been sort of a very conservative evolution. It hasn't been there hasn't been huge leaps. Um, but this year, I think we might experience a real upward tick. And I think a lot of it has to do with the attitudes inside some of these B2B companies and marketers in particular are changing. So they're having to look at things a bit differently now because there is a changing media landscape going on. Now, from a macro point of view, let me just illustrate that. You look at, okay, people like here in the United States, we had on CNN, we had Chris Cuomo, and we had Tucker Carlson on Fox News. Those are two of the big names. And Don Lemon was he on CNBC or he was on MSNBC? One of them. Those people got fired from their networks for one reason or another, and they have gone out on their own. Tucker Carlson's gone out on his own. He's building his own media empire. You've got Chris Cuomo jumped to another network, smaller, but he's changed his whole tune over there, right? He's no longer sort of like the one narrative guy anymore. It's much more open-minded now. And I think Don Lemon is going to go in the same direction. You're seeing what this means to me is, and I know it's a macro look at things, but people no longer trust the platforms as much anymore, meaning Fox or CNBC or whatever. They like the people inside some of those organizations. So they're following the people, the personalities. And those personalities are building their own followings and they're monetizing them. right? Now, that's a very sort of macro celebrity sort of viewpoint. Now, on the B2B standpoint, I'm seeing it there too. I mean, people are leaving companies after years of experience, and they're going out and they're building a consulting practice, maybe an advisory practice. And what they're doing is they're creating a lot more content to get the word out about themselves. People follow people, right? So it's no longer about eWeek, right? Or, you know, Computer Magazine or CX Today or whatever it is, all these publications. Those are still important. I'm not saying they're not important. But what's happening is that the individual influencers are gaining steam now, more so than I've seen them and do so in a long time. And on the brand side, their eyes are opening up to this and they're saying, wow, the media landscape's shrinking. We've got to go out and find influencers we can work with because we've got to get the word out so that people can discover us, they can get educated about us on their own, and we can generate some demand over time. So that's what they're doing. And then that requires building relationships with the influencers, which is very encouraging to me because that's one of the mantras in my own business that I've been a big proponent of from the very beginning. You've got to build relationships with people, influencers. And, you might, there's influencers I haven't spoken to in 5 years, but I'm still going back and forth with them a little bit on social media. We might not have worked together on a project in 5 years, but, I can just ping that influencer quickly and say, hey, I've got something, are you game? So the relationships shortcut a lot of things. And I think that consultants like me know that and build those. I think agencies should be building relationships too. Many agencies, unfortunately, are just transactional in their relationships with influencers, and they shouldn't be. I think they should be building relationships with them as well. And I think that with platforms like Thinkers360, I think you guys probably will see a lot more activity in 2025 because of all this. So you guys offer a lot of content inside of there and rankings and all this stuff. And you've got the influencers grouped in terms of the different leaderboards and niches and stuff. And I can see more holistic viewpoints of those influencers. So I think that you're going to probably see a lot more activity next year than you have in the last couple of years, maybe as a result of all of this. Because the marketing doesn't stop. Everybody's got to market. Individuals have to market themselves. Companies have to market themselves. Trade associations have to market themselves, and it's not going to stop. So it's just going to continue. I think it's just going to shift more so that we're going to see more attention paid to the influencers. And there's like that desire we were talking about before. There's going to be a desire for more programmatic content. And I think that is also encouraging as well.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Happy to do it, man. It was a great conversation, Nick.